Welcome to It's a New Day. My name is James Young. And today my guest is?
Bob Brown.
Okay, give us a little history. Are you from Rochester? How did you get to Rochester? Give us a little background.
I'm not a native of Rochester. I'm from a little place called Arcadia, Florida, in the central part of Florida. Graduated high school there. I went to college a couple of years. Decided I didn't want to be a teacher, a preacher, or insurance salesman, so I went and volunteered for the draft so I could get a free education. So I spent 2 years in the military. While in the military, I met some friends from Rochester and found out I had an aunt here. And came to Rochester after I got discharged in the military. First job I had, I worked for a state hospital dealing with mentally ill people. Didn't like that, quit. And started doing construction, just being a laborer. And going to RIT nights, taking blueprint reading machine shop. And from there, graduated from there to a foreman, to a construction superintendent, I was a minority contractor for a while.
Before you go, when you were saying that you were doing the construction, going to RIT at nighttime, would you let the viewing audience know what time period that was, what year that was?
1955 until 1960.
Okay, and also this was during segregation.
During the time, matter of fact, Rochester more or less was supposed to be a northern city, but Rochester was basically segregated. Black people lived in little enclaves around. There was a group around Joseph Avenue, and there was another group around Clarissa Street, Adams, Atkinson, Tremont. And when you got a long time ago, Clarissa Street ended at the railroad tracks at Plymouth Avenue. That was about as far as you went. And the first business, black business, passed that railroad track on Plymouth Avenue was Latimer's Funeral Home. So at that time, whether we were segregated or not, we segregated ourselves. We had there were they called the east side and the west side. There were people who lived on the east side, black people who didn't identify with people who were on the west side. People on the west side were basically from Florida, and actually got their most of the start from migrant workers who there was a time when there was just like a mule train. People moved up, came up the coast from starting in Florida, in Sanford, Florida, where they cut celery, and when they get to cutting the celery and pick the oranges, they wound up coming to Georgia, picking the peaches, and going to Delaware and picking the potatoes. About July, when the cherries got ripe, they come to Rochester and surrounding, not Rochester per se, but the surrounding towns, Brockport, Sodas, Albion, Medina. And then at that time, a lot of time people got tired of going back and forth. And by that time, after the Korean War, there was a building boom of homes and things. So then a lot of black people who would have never gotten a chance because of the fact that there was a need to have workers. So they stayed, and by the mid-60s, half of the laborers union actually was probably black. And that was at its peak. At the peak of the laborers union, it was probably 5,000 members. That had to be in the 60s when they built the expressway systems. They built Kodak Elm Grove. They built Xerox Webster, the University of Rochester's main campus. All this was being done just about the same time, when at that time you didn't need to have a bunch of formal education. All you needed to do was have a great work ethic. The irony of that was, though, because we had been in that system so long, a lot of the parents of the kids made sure that now they had a chance to make things better for their kids, and a lot of them went into other things, got college educations. And one of the ironies in the construction industry used to be there was a lot of father-son it was a tradition. Today, the father-son no longer applies because most fathers want to make sure their kids didn't have to struggle. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was a lot of back-breaking work with picks, shovels, and almost like slave labor. You know, you got paid a little more. Like the first job I got paid $2.18 an hour, but I could save half of my pay because I only had to pay $13 a week for room and board. So I got room and board for 5 days. The sheets changed twice a week. But a hot dog was 25 cents. A cup of coffee was a dime. A donut was 6 cents. So I could save half my paycheck. So fast forward to where we are today, you can make 10 times more of that. You can't make it work. So Rochester had some good times and bad times, but you saw a trend. The trend didn't start yesterday. This trend started in the 70s of black people losing it. The irony of that was, though, because we had been in that system so long, a lot of the parents of the kids made sure that now they had a chance to make things better for their kids, and a lot of them went into other things, got college educations. And one of the ironies in the construction industry used to be there was a lot of father-son it was a tradition. Today, the father-son no longer applies because most fathers want to make sure their kids didn't have to struggle. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was a lot of back-breaking work with picks, shovels, and almost like slave labor. You know, you got paid a little more. Like the first job I got paid $2.18 an hour, but I could save half of my pay because I only had to pay $13 a week for room and board. So I got room and board for 5 days. The sheets changed twice a week. But a hot dog was 25 cents. A cup of coffee was a dime. A donut was 6 cents. So I could save half my paycheck. So fast forward to where we are today, you can make 10 times more of that. You can't make it work. So Rochester had some good times and bad times, but you saw a trend. The trend didn't start yesterday. This trend started in the 70s of black people losing it.
Okay, but what I wanted to do is now, will you explain about your role in the construction industry, how you ended up, becoming involved with the union and doing the work with the union that you did?
When I initially didn't want any parts of, I had never dealt with people per se, but I've always been an advocate for working people. So as a superintendent, people would say, well, you got to treat Bob's people different because he's going to demand you treat them different. You know, if I found out that some other groups in the company were making more money than mine, I wouldn't know why, and I fought for those. So when people recognize that, say, you know, if you work around him, he's gonna protect you. You're gonna do your job, but he's gonna look. Because most people, if they see me, they still say I'm a mean man, and then in some ways I am. But I had people working with me for 25 years that said I won't work for nobody else because I was gonna pay you what you earn, and I was gonna respect you, and you were gonna respect me. So the former field rep was a man named George Gordon, who was a business agent for the labor's union. Encouraged me to go to work in the union. I said, I don't want to do that. So he said, so at the time my wife and I decided we didn't want to run the construction business anymore, she said, why don't you try it? You can always quit. So I came in as a field rep. And for 2 years I was a field rep. Then the members determined this, no, we want you to be the business manager. We don't want you to be the understudy. So it wasn't one of the, because it was the strange part about it. Had looked bad to people for the simple reason, here I am going to run against a guy who gave me the job. So now how does that look to people saying, well, you stabbed the guy in the back, which I didn't, because I went to him and said, listen, if you aren't going to do your job, you're going to force me to run for your job. He took it as to say, be my guest. Well, I beat him by 2-1. So I was the first black business manager in upstate New York ever. Still am. I retired and they still aren't anymore. But having said that, I've been treated with utmost courtesy in every aspect of this community. And but you built it. You demanded respect. You gave them respect. So what I did was build a union that had shrunk to about 900 members, built it back to almost 2,000 members, made the pensions 5 times better than it was to ensure everybody have a life insurance policy, made sure that today the labor's union, the most respected union in the building trades. But they said, you want something done, you better go talk to the laborers. Because laborers, I don't belong to a political party. I can talk to Maggie Brooks. I can talk to Tom Richards. I talked to Bob Duffy. Quite frankly, probably the worst guy I had to deal with actually was a black guy like me, Bill Johnson. and it wasn't because anything here. I have this real problem with social programs, and people get irritated with me. I said, I happen to believe that whatever you get, you need to earn it. Everything I had, I earned it. I knew how to do it. I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything I wouldn't do. Mm-hmm. So that's the position I took. Even when it came to providing benefits for the participants, I said, listen, anything you have coming, you're going to get it. So the union's been good for me, and it wound up, quite frankly, depressing when I waited about 1990. I started looking around. All the black older members were retiring, and there weren't any replacements. We got to do something here. So we started the first apprenticeship program for laborers in the state of New York was in Rochester, New York. I fought the state. I fought my union in Washington. So we need to train young girls and boys how to become part of the community. It's been successful in a way and not so successful in another way, because what happened about that time, the federal government decided that it needed to have women in employment, regardless of what kind it was. So they had to have women in construction. Well, because of the way we've been in this structure, it seemed to be the girls are prepared to do everything. Girl has a high school education, girl has a phone, girl has a mode of transportation. The boy, grandma will bring me, I'll catch a ride. So I don't have a GED, and it's been sort of disappointing. But we have now in that union probably 30 women, and in the last 3 or 4 years we probably took in probably 50 young black males, which was more than had been taken in 10 years prior, because the opportunities weren't there. So when you look at downtown Rochester from when 30 years ago, when everything was booming, there was Sibley's, there was McCurdy's, there was Midtown Plaza, which was one of the first indoor plazas in the country. They tore it down, or they sat there abandoned for 20 years. And to turn it down, though, we made a commitment with the city to put young city people to work. So we put in about 35, 40 young black men and women into the union that are still there today. And then this mayor came in and said, I'm going to do a project labor agreement and make the goals even be higher. So today there are probably 80, 90 minorities that wouldn't have gotten a chance to be make a living. And the saddest, well, I don't want to say it's great when you look, when young black kids come, they tell you, I own this house and I can help my mother do this. It's you want to cry, because you said, that's the only thing you want in life is to help one of these kids do that. So that's been a godsend for me.
I want to come back when you were talking about some of the social issues, how you're talking about how you developed this apprenticeship program. We were talking off camera a couple of days ago, and you were talking about some of the things that you were involved in, how you were trying to get the school board and other organizations in this community environment. Would you share that experience with our viewing audience and the things that you went through and some of the difficulties that you faced with trying to get, for instance, the city or the school district or some of these community organizations to help you develop some of the projects and initiatives that you were speaking about or that you wanted to do?
Sure. Well, let's start with the environment of the schools. Probably 10 years ago, we as out of a building trade, there's 16 unions make up the building trade, labor's just being one of them. We had a discussion about Senator Gant and other politicians would scream about there were no black people in the unions, and you start looking around and then there weren't. So the union themselves decided as a group that we want to do what we can to change it. So at that point, we had an organization called Unicon, which is unions and contractors in construction. And so rather than talk about it, we funded it. We paid, the members of the unions agreed to pay 8 cents an hour into a fund. So for our first thing was say, well, Edison Tech is a technical school that we ought to be able to tap into that school as a resource. So we went over there a couple of times and got pushed back. Couldn't even get a headway. They didn't even talk to you. Rivera twice, Clifford Janey. We got a chance to go in the door with the interim superintendent, Mr. Kaler. We went to see Mr. Kaler. Mr. Kaler says, well, what do you want to do? So we want to be able to involve the kids in the construction industry, but we need to be able to do it together. He said, why don't you? Because they won't let you. So he said, I'll take care of it. We had a meeting with the people over at Edison, and it was semi-fruitful. You could see the pushback in the people in the administration, and so you sort of like got discouraged and said, you know what, I've never let anything beat me in my life. We ain't gonna buy that. So we went back when Brizard came, let's try it again. Brizard, he got a lot of flack from people, but Brizard took the position, if he can't believe that they don't want to do this, so we wound up we first tried to do it in classrooms. Well, you can't teach kids in little classrooms, so I came with the idea, we ought to try to expand this. Well, what would you do? I said, why don't we just build a house using the kids? City School District pushed back like no tomorrow. You can't do it with kids because you don't have a license. Whatever they push back, we wouldn't accept it. We said, no, we're not going to accept it. So every time they push back, we push back. So in spite of this, I will say, in spite of this district and the school board, we got that house built using kids from the neighborhood, and we got the first house built, got it sold, but the goal I have in my mind, and I still have that goal, is to turn Edison Tech into a school that the kids who go to Edison Tech want to go to school there and wind up getting an education. When it was with my son. My son went there, graduated from it. He had about 20 shops. You had to check a shop. You had to pass it. Mm-hmm. Today it's like a stomping ground. So I'm not going to give up on it. One of the things that I believe we could do, and it takes the community, that just to take a group of people. The community itself has to be involved to say, look, if your child wants to can't afford to go to college, don't know what he or she wants to do, shouldn't they be in some kind of training program to let them get some skills? So even if they do go to college, they will at least know that there's some place some slack if they don't make it in one thing or the other. So we first developed an application, and we developed it, and the district did agree to do the mailing. They mailed it, and we sent out 1,300 of them. We got 600 replies, with the goal being, well, okay, by now we're on the right path, because now we're going to have kids who want to go to school. So the first group of kids that wanted to go to school, they did. What happens is, because Edison was in such bad shape, they put it on the list to close. So now the principal that was at Edison had only been there 2 years, but because he was the principal when they closed it, they said, well, you can't be the principal no more. They said that was the law. And I say any law that's made can be broken. So that was just this great principle that the kid loved him, he loved his job, now can't be a part of this system. Even to this day, he can't be part of the system. So now they and I had the good fortune of all of a sudden one day, school superintendent called, would you like to have a high school named after you? Who wouldn't want a high school named after him? So certainly I want a high school named after me, so they named a high school after me, but my goal was to have that school named after me. I wanted to make it work. And it hadn't worked. It hadn't worked because I don't think they intended for it to work, because if they would have left Matt Laniak there. We would have kept that program where we would have sent out application to parents and the students in 9th grade saying, do you want to go to a technical school and pick this? By now you should have been able to weed the kids out so every kid in that school will be there because they want to be there, not because they have to be there. I said, because now you can, and you got some results from it. I saw a couple of young men, they graduated from high school, they got their own little business. They can build some steps. They can do a little electrical work, and those are things that we're trying to build on. To say, look, if we can get 3 or 4 of us do that, it'll bear fruit, because he's going to tell somebody, I went to school, and I can't believe the disconnect between this district and the public. I just can't believe that disconnect is there, but it's there.
Is the president superintendent, are you working with him to try to get this initiative done?
When they brought Vargas on, I thought it was going to be a good thing. I happen to believe it's not a good thing anymore for some reason. Vargas was on the school board for years, and my first inclination was to have a guy who, he said, gee, if he already been there, he ought to be able to work with them. I find now he's too much like them. You know, it's one person can't change that system. You can change the head all you want to. If the worms in the can still moving, and the system is such, who would want to work with somebody when the board itself is dysfunctional? So anytime 4 of those people decide you had to go, you wouldn't take a job like that. When there's no job protection, because you working at home with 4 people who, if you talk to each one of the school boards as individuals, you couldn't talk to better people. But put them in a room together, and brother, you got a problem.
You're saying that there's, well, before I go there, they say because of the bureaucracy, they say if a bureaucrat fell out of a window, it would take him 2 weeks to hit the ground.
You got it.
Okay, but what I wanted to ask, you're saying that there is a disconnect between the schools and the communities and this initiative, what you wanted to do. Is that disconnect because, are you suggesting that the community or these community organizations are not looking at an issue like this? Because I totally agree that we should have a couple of levels of education for those that are academically inclined, the ones that, you know, are inclined for the math and the science, and to be those innovators in those particular disciplines is a beautiful thing. But I also think that there also needs to be a place for the laborers, or for which is the professions, which is being in the industries of construction, being a carpenter, being a welder. I mean, these are things that are always going to be. How come we have such a disconnect of the community, perhaps maybe not supporting this? Why aren't these community organizations supporting something like this? Because as it stands now, as we've talked off camera, we've got what they told us last year, out of all the black males that entered into high school, only 9% graduated. I mean, there's a disconnect somewhere.
To me, we need to start where the problem started, and that was the problem started for us in 1973. Well, Peter was so what was significant about 1973? 1973, Rockefeller put the drug law in place that said lock them up, throw the key away for the drugs. So what happens since young kids couldn't find a job? Everybody loved money, so they sold drugs. They got picked up. They got sent away for long sentences in prison. Didn't learn anything in prison. They got back out, and we see the results of it now. The problem that nobody didn't think of what they were doing when they were doing it. They're saying the war on drugs. You can go to Florida, you can go to California. It's been a failure, and it's a failure for the simple reason we don't talk about the real problem. The real problem is where does the drugs come from? They don't just jump up in the minority neighborhoods. They're bought in by some rich person, and they're bought by some rich person to go back in the suburb to use them. But now when they get out of jail, all they know to do is to come back in the community, and they don't have an education. Even if they learn the trade, they're afraid that if you went to apply for a job, if they know you're a felon, you can't get one. So now here we are, and they have all kinds of programs by the Urban League, Baden Street, to try to say, well, we're gonna get them GEDs and those things. But you didn't get past the real problem. Is they have a record, and that long as you have that record, it's going to be a black mark against you. So instead of doing that, instead of training people to say, look, you can work with your hands. So you can be a bricklayer, you can be a carpenter, you can, if you're going, whatever we're going to train you, we're going to head you toward employment instead, not say training, because now the training has been a disappointment. So there have been people who have ideas about how to do things. One of the things that's even more intriguing was the amount of help that the majority of the community has tried to do in the minority community and got no credit for it. Not that they ask for anything. Like, let me give you an example. About 10, 12 years ago, a group of business people decided they wanted to try to pitch and help the neighborhood centers where they could have places for kids to learn. They raised about $19 million to renovate the neighborhood's settlement centers. They renovated Parcells, they renovated Saxon Street, they rented one over on First Street. The ones that needed to get help the most didn't get it. That was Montgomery Center and Baden Street. Willie Lightfoot had a program over there on Jefferson Avenue. Willie Lightfoot got that building, his old style market, got it done. The two buildings, so I didn't know there was a brouhaha in the city of Rochester about territories. There was Baden Street was there, and there was another settlement in the 21st Ward, someplace. I have no clue where it was, but we envisioned just, let me back up. I was invited to be on the board to help distribute the $19 million. So we asked the Baden Street to let us view their records. We're not showing y'all records. Well, you can't help somebody if you can't see the records. So we asked the same thing of Montgomery Center. Nope. So we wound up, the last part of money, we built a new center at the corner of Carter Street and Norton was a center we had no intention of building. It's a great facility now, but Baden Street's still in the same condition it was 50 years ago. Montgomery Center, Calvin Lee became the director several years ago. He came to the building trades and asked us for help, so we went over there and building trades, did electrical work, painting, all that stuff. So I don't know who runs Montgomery, but it could have been done over. So there's been a mismatch of what the needs of the community until maybe 3 years ago when we finally got people to listen and said, you got to find a way to get people in the city of Rochester to work. And it came to me because when I drove around my neighborhood, I saw so many kids didn't go to school every day. You know, they were selling drugs. And that was a challenge for me. And the kid told me, look, I can make more money selling drugs. In 2 hours, I can make working about like McDonald's for 40 hours. You know, you're right, but that's not the answer. And I was determined I wasn't gonna let that be the stopping point. So I started talking to the mayor, started talking to the county exec, started talking to anybody who would listen and say, we got to do something about motivating the kids in the city. I will say there are people who were trying, as Elaine Spall has a program, Junior Post has a program there, but they're too small. We need to find a way to quit being a me program. Just say, let's get it done. You don't need to take any kudos for getting what you need done, just do it. And if we can get that done, but I don't know, I read a lot and I can't figure, I can't understand whether we still have the slave mentality. I just can't seem to let you get ahead without me trying to pull you back. I can't get past it. But we 3 or 4 generations past slavery, but we still got slave mentality. I can't understand why we can't break out of it. Every group of people you know in society help themselves except us. We just can't, we don't seem to be able to get past it. If you had a past, well, you did that 25 years ago. How about like use the past for reference and move forward? But that's not what you see. And it's even worse in Rochester when you look at babies having babies and you go to a junior high or middle school and see a nursery in a middle school, it's just heartbreaking. 13-year-old girls and boys having fathered kids, how are they going to make it? So, but you could take position of, so what do you care? Well, I care because I got grandkids and kids that I believe if we don't change it, there's no future for anybody. There's no society can take care of that many dysfunctional people. And if we don't take some responsibility, not me, not you, it's a we problem. This is our problem. This is our community. We ought to be able to lay our political differences aside and look out for the benefit and the good of the people in the community. Now, there are people who, if you talk to them individually, they will agree with you, everything I said. But to get them to move off a dime is a different issue. So I don't know. I just figure I'll just move one little penny at a time. So I'm not, the rest of my life I intend to spend it trying to make things better in the city of Rochester for underprivileged kids. And well, I will say I've had a lot of help when I ask anyone to do something for me, whether it be the mayor, whether it be the county exec. They've never said no. Sometimes they might say, we got to think about it, but they don't say no, which is more than most. If you, I had some aspirations, but some of the black politicians on city council got disenchanted because they don't seem to, don't seem to get it. If you can write a contract, you look around how many $1 million, if you take the time and put up on your computer, how much nonprofit property is got tax exempt, where people got loans, they don't have to pay taxes for 10 years, but they got sometimes $10, $15 million of mind your money to build projects in the city, not use anybody from the city on it. They look like us on it. When I say look us, I don't want to be racist prejudiced, but I'm just fact. At least it ought to be somebody from the city of Rochester working. And you can't tell me if a developer comes in and says, I want to get this project and I need a grant for so many $1 million. You tell them, how many people you going to have from the community? And you say none. Well, tell them come back in a couple of weeks and see what's, and they're going to think about it. Well, but if you don't put in, if you don't make some demands, there aren't going to be any. And then when they do get it, so the unions come in, and whether the unions come back now and said, as a ex-union official, a contractor called me livid, said, why are they beating me up in the non-union people doing nothing? That's what he means. Well, I got to make minority goals. I got to make minority environment. The people who I compete against don't have to do any of those. So you go to city council, why aren't you putting regs in place? That's city council's job. Their job is not to, city council in the last 50 years has been, this is a rubber stamp. But what happened, they let the mayor, whether they be a black or white mayor, bring projects to them and they sign on. It should be the other way. They should bring projects to the mayor. There should be a push foot to say, we aren't going to do anything in this community unless you involve people from the community. Well, you can get sued, so what? That's what you got lawyers for. But I happen to believe that you're going to find people who will find a way to adhere to the law. But if you keep pushing the can down the road, nothing's going to happen. You look at, you see 5 of the city councilmen are black. They don't make any push to include minorities in nothing.
How do we begin to turn this community to see what you're seeing? I guess part of the reason is because of your involvement. You're out here on a regular basis. You see the inconsistencies. You see the inequities. How do we get people that aren't seeing these things, or perhaps aren't paying attention to these things, perhaps even feel that it isn't even their concern? How do we turn people around to see the validity of, for instance, when a developer comes in and wins a contract to build a particular site, and there's no one there that looks like you and I, gaining anything from employment from that? I think those are issues that are very pertinent.
They are. The real problem is how do you, we live in a democratic society. Look at the city of Rochester. Used to be city council elected by a district. I think only about 5 of them, I think, now elected by a district, and the rest of them are so-called at large, meaning that they don't, they aren't in particular any group for the whole city. Yeah, there to be some way to make people be accountable for how they got paid or why they got paid. The system today doesn't make that seem very viable to do. Now, I don't know how we get there, but I agree with you. We need to figure a way to make people be accountable for as long as, but one of the things it could start if you could just get, excuse me, one of the things, if we could just get the ministers in Rochester to just step up, there's only one God, but you don't have to forget about what part of the thing but for the good of the community, they should be the ones starting this thing. Look, we gotta get a message out that we need to save ourselves. It's frustrating when you don't see people not being upset about not being able to grow their congregation. That they just seem to be the status quo work. If you go to most churches, you see a bunch of old people. They haven't done anything to reach out to young people. And the politicians, they know they're going to get reelected if they get past the primary. So there's no competition and there's no conversation. And but until we go back to number one, square one is if we don't start educating the kids, even people who are now in the work pool, as soon as they're making enough money, they leave the city. They go in the suburb where they know their kids can get a good education. So we got to fix first thing first. And the first thing to do is fix a broken school system that people said, no, it's dysfunctional. And there should be somebody, whether it be editorials or whatever, that writes a story every week. There are teachers in the city of Rochester get paid every week, but the high school graduation rate is 9%. Not settled with, and I'm a union official. I happen to believe that the unions have too much power when they can say, I'm gonna get my pay regardless. So you can't fire them. 1, 2, 90% of them don't live in the city. 90% of the cops don't live in the city. 90% of the firemen don't live in the city. So they don't have an investor in the city other than they come in the city and collect their earnings. So until there's some accountability, I will give the mayor credit. He did for the last police exam. He sent out a memo that said, if you don't have a city address, don't bother to take the test. Now the city police for 50 years have said they couldn't find minorities. Well, this class is going to have over 50% minorities. Going to do the same thing at the fire department. So there needs to be a leader that says, I understand, and I will give this man credit. He did say, and he said to a bunch of white people, he was tired of people coming in from the suburbs, making a living, going back out and taking it back to the suburb where they live. So they're going to have to use some city environment. So here's a man who for 25 years I despised. But the man came in and he lived up to everything he said he's going to do. He's done. So he came in and said we're gonna put minorities on the fire department. We're gonna put them in the police department. We're gonna and anything I've asked to do about the schools, one of the things he won't do is mention mayor control, and he says that that's for politics. I happen to believe that I'm not sure mayor control is the answer, but there needs to be somebody in control. Right now, it's a dysfunctional system. When you got a school board that doesn't not out in the community making issues every day, they get paid. If you didn't want the job, then don't. Sure, it doesn't. It's supposed to be a part-time job. That's your business. You took the job, then do it. Instead, you can pick up the papers any day of the week. You never see him. You see that Van White. He's always different, but some of the things he says make sense. Other ones don't. The rest of them, just like it's just almost frustrating. You want to cry. You figure, what are these people doing? I was brought up in a different era where my parents made sure that I was going to get an education, and everybody around was going to do the same thing, and they have respect. They don't have the school board doesn't have any respect. We have this Senator Gant was instrumental in getting us $325 million in state money to renovate 12 buildings. I was actually pushing for 2 other guys to be on the board. Behind my back, they were pushing for me to be on the board. So who wanted on the board? Me. So I'm on the school modernization board to charge with renovating 12 buildings. They gave us money for 30 million to retrofit 12 buildings. And those, if you count all the school board members that have been to one of the board meetings, it wouldn't feel the fingers on my hand. How could that be that the biggest construction project ever in the city of Rochester, regardless whether it be public or private, is that project? They disconnected from it. They most likely have 7 volunteer board members on the board, and they sent something over there and said it's got to be approved by them. Do you think they would come to a meeting and say, well, why is this being? Don't come. Malik Evans came before we got the program going, made a little 10-minute spiel. Cynthia Elliott came a couple of times, never came back. Interesting enough, the guy that came the most got defeated in the last school board. That was Alan Williams. The rest of them don't even show up. So how could you spend $300 million, the biggest project ever in the city of Rochester, and the school board members themselves don't participate? We've had neighborhood meetings, and we are the board. We are the school board. We go to neighborhood meetings and explain what a project is going to be like. That should be done by the school board. That's what they get charged with doing. So until somebody drops a bomb over there at Broad Street, I don't think anything is going to change. Vargas can be there forever as long as they, it's like Kodak. You can bring a new guy in there, but sooner or later they're going to go back to the same way they were doing it. And that's what they continued doing, the exact same thing they were doing over and over and over.
Also, there's a disconnect with leadership inside this community. We are leaderless people. Back in the 60s, we had Jim McCullough, Reverend Florence, Lakey Ashford, people of that nature, as well as other people that I'm just not mentioning.
Connie Mitchell. They had, you're right, the real problem is there aren't any one-on-one black leaders anymore. What it is that when Jim McCullough died, there hasn't been a leader since. You know, we look at Jim. If Jim was alive now, Jim would probably be my age. He'd probably be in his late 70s. The most disheartening thing, and now there used to be a young person doing some of the things that Jim did. That person hadn't shown his face yet. They had a young minister. I can't think of his name anyway. I thought he would have been a great leader because what he did, he made a big push to have Wegman hire kids in their stores. And the Republican Party convinced him that he could run for state senate and not start at the bottom, but start at the top. Lost, gave him a little job downtown, and he lasted a while. He disappeared, but he had the attributes to be a leader. I haven't seen anybody else be. One of the person I was thinking could be a leader would be Lovely Warren, but Now she wants to run for mayor, so I don't know what that's going to be, because she you could talk to her and she'd listen, but there's no community organization that's out there that you can talk to that understands what the needs are in this community, and that's shameful when you look at that system that way.
And what has happened to us? I mean, how did this go so awry? Because there was a time Lakey Ashford, who ran the Urban League. I mean, he ran that Urban League. I mean, if you had concerns, he didn't run the office. He didn't run the Urban League from his office. He ran the Urban League from the streets. I mean, if there was an issue, he came to where that issue was. The same thing with ABC at that time. When Jim McCullough came up with this organization, they didn't lead that organization from inside of a building somewhere. They came to where that issue was. The same thing with Reverend Florence, and on with the people that we had at those particular times dealing with the issues. Today, I'd be hard-pressed to find this leadership. I don't know what they're doing.
Well, fast forward 40 years. The 1964 riots was the worst thing ever happened in Rochester, because before you had black communities. You could say, you're right, you go in the streets, you saw people. You go on Jefferson Avenue now, there's nothing there. Jefferson Avenue is gone, Joseph Avenue is on a shadow of itself. So even if you went in the streets, who would you see? Because the riots made the community realize we want to make things better. So where we were redlined before, when you first came to Rochester, black could hardly buy a house past Clifford Avenue. They couldn't buy a house in the 19th Ward. The riots changed that, but changing that was one of the things that didn't change it for the better as far as we're concerned, because it now made it sure that you will never have a black power base again. You might have, Senator Gant has a district that carved out in the city of Rochester, but basically there are no places where you can say, well, I can go down here and talk to a whole bunch of people, because I don't care what part of the city you're going, you see some of us. Before we were, and integration was a good thing in some ways, and in some ways it was a bad thing, because now we separate. And how do you get the masses? You go to church, probably 75% of people in the churches, black churches, don't live in the city anymore. They live in the suburbs. So you can't say, well, should that be that the suburban people give up on the city? My idea and the argument is no, because that's where we all started. And if you don't get that back, to say, look, never mind that you left those people behind, you still owe it something. You owe it your beings. I happen to owe everything I have in my life to Rochester and the community. So I figure I need to pay some of it back. But how many people do you know that think the same way I do? I won't say I'm the only one. I will say there are groups of them. The problem we have is they're so splintered until we can never get together and talk about the real issue. One of the things we got to try to find a way is to try to find a way to talk to people that you aren't talking down to them or talking at them or about them or make them feel that way. I'm not good at that. I'm one of those people in your face kind of persons, and that causes people to push back. He's too straight up at you. So I don't know how you get there, Jim, but we need to find a way to talk about issues without throwing blame. It's got to be a we thing. We got here because we all from the same cloth, and we can't. And as long as we can point fingers, it'll never get solved. We need to say this community dissolved in the system it is today, and we let it. And we've got to find a way to bring it back. And my theory is to bring it back piece by piece, little by little, by doing as much as I possibly can. And hopefully I can, if I get one person today and somebody else get another one tomorrow, because we've got to remember what we want now. We want to fix it tomorrow. Well, it took 50 years for it to fall apart. I hope it don't take 50 years to put it back together, but it's not going to come back together overnight. There's just too many problems out there that needs to get fixed.
Are we dinosaurs in this era? And what I mean by that, we grew up in a period of time when it was about our survival was because of the collective. As a collective community, we found safety in that, and at the same time, because of the collective, it moved us along. So when the water rose, all the boats in the water rose. Whereas today, because we are splintered, because we can live wherever it is that we want to live, there is actually no such thing as a black community as there once was. And now, how do we deal with this? And then the other part of that, because there is this separation inside this community, inside the black community, if you will, we stop passing down the history, we stop doing the things that kept us together as a community, and now we're separated, we're individualized. I think that this is what has given rise to a lot of the teenage pregnancies with these young people having kids and then nowhere to turn. Now, teenage pregnancy has always been a problem, but I can remember when I was young, if a teenage mother became pregnant and let's say their parents threw them out of the house, there was somebody in that community who would tell that child, come in here, have that baby, and we'll help you take care of this child. And despite this being a teenage pregnancy, that mother, that teenage mother having that child at least had a chance of becoming productive and becoming better than what we see today. Whereas now, I mean, people are just basically fending for themselves, and I don't see how we're ever going to get back to where we were, because it seems the further we go, the further we keep getting away from ourselves. I think that this generation of people, if they began to start watching some of the old films, the documentaries, the freedom riders and things of that nature, and saw what it took for us to get to be where we are, and the liberties that young people are enjoying now came because of mass demonstrations. It became from bloodshed. It came from fire hoses. It came from dogs biting us. It came from getting beat in the head. It came from people who just viciously disliked us simply because of the color of our skin, not because we did anything to them, simply because of the color of our skin. And I think that all of that has been lost. And I am suggesting that if young people understood where we came from to where we are now, then they would see that perhaps maybe more than 9% of black males need to graduate. Perhaps if we understood this a little bit better, now instead of people just fathering children and leaving, maybe we can get these people to see that it's in the best interest of the child and this community for them to stay together. And I think that those are some of the things that we are missing in this environment today. And I think that these are the things that keep us separated. But I do know this, that if we don't figure out a way how to become more inclusive and how to turn this thing around, we're going to see the great demise of this community. I mean, we're seeing it now with the murders that we see, with this unbelievable failure rate. And to me, that's just as, that's just as bad. Okay, although these people are dying immediately, but that is genocide, because if we bring a person into this world and provide them nothing more than just a handout, what does that do to the quality of this individual? I mean, it takes away our purpose as human beings. I think that perhaps maybe life wasn't necessarily meant to be easy, and that's what gives us our comfort of figuring out how to move from one stage to the other. That's what gives us a sense of accomplishment, being able to figure this out. But now things are just being handed. I say consistently that Rochester has, in my mind, one of the best social nets in the country. If you don't have any food, there are places that you can go and receive food, to me, which is a beautiful thing, so no one ever has to go hungry. If you don't have clothing, there are clothing banks here and good stuff, okay? I mean, different from when I was coming up, when we used to have the rummy sale. Oh, that was disgusting, okay? The healthcare system that they have here. Growing up in Rochester, when I moved to other places, I thought I didn't have to pay hospital bills because I knew that if there was something wrong with me here in Rochester, I could immediately go and have those issues resolved. Those are beautiful things, but unfortunately, instead of them being safety nets helping you through a very difficult time so you can get back on your feet and become the responsible person that we all need and should be, this has now become a way of life. We now have generation of people, this is all they've ever seen. They've seen the grandmother receive these handouts. They've seen the mother. They're receiving it. They're passing it on to their children. And it's now to the point that we're not even trying to figure out how to go out and do things for ourselves. And I think that that's the disconnect that we've got to come to realize. As I tried to say, I mean, this hour goes by so quickly. And I've just been warned that we're just about out of time. But what I wanted to be able to do is to thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us your perspective. And I feel people that are our age and older, I think that this is our responsibility to come in to let young people know what it took for us to get to this point, and that this struggle is not over, that there's a long way that we have to go, because you've got these iPods and these iPads and iPhones, and you can listen to 2,000 stations, you know, on the satellite, and all these other great, fabulous things, the internet, Google phones, but that is not where your freedom lies. Your freedom really lies in what we can do and in the connection that we have with one another. And I'd like to thank you for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you back again so we can
I'd love to continue this conversation.
My name is James Young. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be blessed, and remember, it's a new day.